Hi, in this episode I'll be talking to Dr. Lauren Smith and her dive buddy Chris Rickard about an important scientific discovery that they've made and need your help to protect it. Do you fancy a brew? So welcome to episode 3 of the bonus editions of the Fancy a Brew podcast. I want to welcome back Dr. Lauren Smith. Some of you may remember her from episode 20. She's a shark scientist. We talked about her pizza oven and her dog called Tatty, who she's trained to collect egg cases. And she's come on with her friend Chris Rickard. So they've come on to talk about an important discovery that they've made and how we can highlight this issue and really put it out there to the masses, because it really needs some current attention. So Lauren, what can you tell me?
Thanks, Andy. It's great to be back and letting me witter on again. I've got Chris on today, and Chris is probably the most passionate diver I know. Related to diving, I should clarify that, but he absolutely loves scuba diving, and he scuba dives more than anybody I know, and he loves the photography side of things as well. So he's super passionate about it. And it's kind of thanks to him, really, that we're even talking about what we're going to be talking about today. So I'll let Chris kind of introduce that in a minute, really, to be honest. But I used to work with Chris when I was at Macduff Aquarium, so that's how I know Chris, really. He's my main buddy diving, and to be honest, that's who I dive with all the time.
So Chris, who are you?
Yeah, hi Andy, and thanks Lauren, and I particularly want to say thanks for saying he's my main buddy diving, obviously, as if you wouldn't want to be pals with me outside diving. So hello, thanks for having me. As Lauren said, we met first at Macduff Marine Aquarium, where we both worked. That was a few years ago now, Lauren. Both keen divers, and as she also said, I do a lot of recreational diving as well as at work. Especially to do with photography and marine life ID. I consider myself a keen amateur ID specialist. But a long time ago now, it must have been a year and a half ago, Lauren and I started speaking about the possibility of trying to find common skate, or were they flapper skate by then, Lauren? I forget, it's not been that long since they changed, has it? But common skate, flapper skate, and trying to find out more about them. Basically where you can find them. Neither of us had ever seen one in the wild, despite hundreds of dives between us in Scotland. So it was a case of let's look into it a bit and see if we can figure out where we might see these things. So I was just very lucky one day. Basically, it was a throwaway comment on a Facebook post by a scallop diver. The post was about something entirely different, and I happened to notice that he'd mentioned seeing a large purse. One of his scallop divers had brought one up to the surface to ask him what it was, and he'd said, "I think that's a flapper skate purse. Can you put it back, please?" Anyway, I followed this up, and after back and forward messaging, managed to blag my way onto a scallop diving boat for the day out of Kyleakin and Skye. And the guys took me to a site, not exactly the site where they'd found this other purse. They said that was a random bit in the middle of the sea, basically, where there wasn't really anything going on. It was just a random purse. But there was an area where they said they'd seen what was their words? 3 or 4 over the years, I think they'd said. Anyway, so we dropped down onto this site, just onto the flat seabed. Nothing in evidence. We swam around maybe 10, 15 meters and started seeing a slightly different seabed, more bouldery. And we swam up over that and started finding purses. And that first dive, we found over 40 of these huge flapper skate purses, which was pretty impressive. So Lauren got a very excited text message when I got back to the surface on the boat there.
Yeah, for sure. I was just pretty impressed because, like, the flapper skate, we're talking about a critically endangered species. So, it's one of the most impressive, I'd say the most impressive flat shark. It's a little bit of a sort of shame for the skates, really, to be known as flat sharks, because they're pretty cool elasmobranchs in their own right. So big, massive cartilaginous fish that are completely flattened out. I mean, they're big as barn doors. That was one of their nicknames, used to be barn doors. Wow. And they were collectively known as the common skate. Now, they were collectively put in with the blue skate. So I think it was actually in 2009 that they decided that actually they're 2 distinct species. So you've got the flapper skate and the blue skate, and they were collectively known as the common skate. but they were under a lot of heavy fishing pressure, and the numbers were massively reduced. So at the moment, there's potentially a bit of a stronghold around Orkney. And there is, we're going to be having a chat with the Orkney Skate Trust guys later this week as well, because we want to try and see what we can do collaboratively now with these guys, and try and figure out a bit more about this site, and about how the animals are actually using the site as well. But they're like an incredible elasmobranch that we have in our waters. They've been massively overfished. They're critically endangered on the IUCN Red List. So basically at this point, any more that we can find out about them would be beneficial. And this is like classic sort of citizen science, really. Just, you know, with the use of divers, mostly it was just a bunch of divers that Chris, you know, managed to get together, who were really passionate about protecting the marine environment and about trying to find out more about this site and this species. And everybody just got on board, really, and just wanted to find out more. And it was just recently, was it 2 weeks ago now? I forget, 2 weeks ago, that Chris managed to pull off, like, getting everybody together, despite, you know, obviously having to factor in all the coronavirus stuff, and sort all that out, and get us out on some boats again, so we could go and survey the site again and try and find out more about it. So yeah, do you want to tell us a little bit more about those dives, Chris, which this time I was a part of, and I was super excited to be on board?
Yeah, I might just add, you were invited the first time round, you just couldn't make it in that initial dive, so don't blame me that you didn't see them straight off.
What was she doing? Was she scuffing pizza or something like that, or walking the dog?
I mean, you know what she's like. She's awful. But yeah, so I was very lucky in a way. Like I've got a reasonably good contacts list, and there's a lot of people on there that are just as passionate as myself, and they're all well connected too. So we ended up getting more divers than we really needed, to be honest. But it was great having lots of dive support. But more than that, we had support from the local creel and scallop diving guys as well. They were the ones that took us out on their boats, free of charge, I might add. And you know, they know how important it is to protect these sort of animals. So yeah, we had local guys taking us out on the boats and dived the site again. It's actually the third time I've been there now. I was lucky in that the one sort of contact we've had from the Scottish Government after I announced the initial finding of these purses was via SNH, now Nature Scot, and they took me along on one of their surveys. We did a survey right at the start of March, just before lockdown hit, and dived the site again, and did various scientific things, proper scientific things with these purses, trying to get as much information as we can. That paper's not actually out yet. It should be out reasonably soon, fingers crossed, to get a bit more data about them. But that was, you know, what, 7-8 months ago. So I was keen to get back and check whether they were still there. They're obviously very fragile, and just one pass of a scallop dredger could, you know, destroy them. So we were very keen to get back, and thankfully they are still there as of 2 weeks ago anyway. And one diver saw 93 of these mermaids purses in one dive. Oh. I saw well over 100 on 2 dives, going different directions, so definitely different ones. And it's just that they're just spectacular things. Just to give folk an idea, they're about the size of slightly smaller than A4 size, to give you an idea. Okay, so they're up to nearly 30 centimeters long and sort of nearly 20 centimeters wide. So they're ginormous. You can't really mistake them for much else, especially when they're underwater and they're still fully inflated, if you like. They do dry out when they come out on and get washed up on beaches, which they do quite often all over the country, actually, but mostly up in Orkney. I know Lauren's found a few various places in Scotland. But yeah, it was just really great to get back. We've put a lot of pressure on the government, suggesting that they should try and protect the area. We're in talks with various things at the moment, thankfully, so hopefully things will move on reasonably quickly and we'll get some sort of protection in place. Because as I say, these purses are so large that they would get picked up in trawl nets as well as, you know, crushed by a dredger. So they are very vulnerable. But not only this one little spot where we found these purses, but, you know, they're young. Lauren will call them neonates because she likes her scientific terminology. But the young, when they first hatch, they're 30 odd centimeters long themselves, maybe even slightly more. They're easily big enough to get caught in trawls. So, you know, we really need to protect a wider area. And actually, I'm quite excited to say that one of my friendly scallop divers has been reporting back over the last couple of weeks that they're actually sighting juvenile skate. Lauren, you won't know this, but I had another message from him this morning saying that he's seen another 2 juvenile skate at a different site in the inner
Wow.
Sound just this morning. So there's juveniles out there, and it's a wide area. So you can't just, you know, pick up a spot on the map and protect that because there's a few purses there. It's obviously a really important site for these critically endangered animals. So the sooner the government act and protect this area, the better.
What do you think's instigated this congregation in this particular area? Is there anything specific?
This is the thing. Almost nothing is known about these animals at all. So anything we say at this moment is basically conjecture. It's basically fancy guessing, isn't it? The topography, the underground sort of shape suggests that they live in deeper water and come up into shallower areas to either breed or lay their eggs or both. Nobody really knows. There's a lot of work going on just now with tagging these animals, which some folk don't agree with. But I mean, how else are you going to find out anything about these animals? You can't protect them if you don't know where they spend their time. You know, if we find that they all spend their time in one particular channel out in the middle of the North Sea, we can protect that channel and then they're safe. So it is really important. And I've got to say at this point, the angling community has really, really helped with the knowledge we do have about these animals. The anglers catch these quite regularly in certain areas, and they're landed. A lot of these angling boats have actually got special equipment on board now to enable them to land them more safely so they don't damage the animals, and then return them safely to the sea after they've been measured. They get sexed. It's pretty obvious to tell in an adult whether it's a male or a female. They get photos taken, obviously. All these animals are very individual. Their pattern is a bit like a fingerprint. You can tell an individual from its pattern. And Lauren might correct me here in the science, but there's been specific individuals that have been caught and released multiple times in very similar locations. The problem is we don't know whether they've actually hung around there that whole time between catches, or whether they've disappeared off to the Arctic and back in between those times. So very little is known. So any science we can do is a real bonus.
Yeah, I think it's worth saying there as well that you know, once the species was identified as being distinct from the blue skate, and it was realised that there's so few of these animals, it's actually been illegal to land them commercially since 2009. So, you know, it's illegal to actually land them. Obviously, you wouldn't be targeting them either, but that doesn't stop the fact that they can be caught as bycatch, basically, and they're just so enormous that you know, it's a real struggle to kind of get them freed out of a massive net or out of a dredge live, basically. So
I don't know if we actually mentioned how big they are, Lauren, did we? Because we're saying enormous and folk maybe aren't really thinking how big they are, but I've only ever seen one. I just checked my dives, by the way, Lauren. I've done just over 800 dives in Scotland, and not including my aquarium dives, and I've seen one adult flapper skate. So that gives you an idea how uncommon they are to see. The one I saw wasn't a huge one by the scale, by the size of some of the other ones that have been seen, but she was just over 2 meters long and about 180 or so wide. And if you paste that out on the floor and draw it as a sort of giant diamond shape with a long tail, that's a large animal. These are sort of 150 kilo animals. You know, they're absolutely massive, and just truly spectacular. The footage that I got, it's so graceful. It takes off the bottom. It was lying still, just watching me. I swam up closely, took a few photos. It thought, I don't like the look of you. I'm just going to swim off. It didn't panic and swim off. It just sort of gracefully left the seabed, and just the undulations that they make when they swim are just fantastic. And that's a sign that they are, as Lauren said, a cartilaginous animal, very, very flexible. They don't have any bone in their bodies apart from in their jaws and teeth. I think I'm right in saying that, Lauren. So they are truly spectacular animals.
That's like as big as this room that I'm in. That's frighteningly big. So
yeah,
I know you said overfishing, but is it people were fishing for them, or is it just bycatch that sort of reduced numbers, do you think?
At one stage they were being targeted, yeah, and it was just part of just a massive fishery operation, basically. But again, yeah, bycatch is just a huge huge kind of thing. And I think it's just really the sort of the style of fishing as well. You know, it's just, to a certain extent, yes, it is unavoidable. You know, if you're going to go out to a specific area, and if you're doing a dredge or a trawl anywhere, then there's always the chance, you know. And it's more the fact that even whether they were targeted or whether they were accidental bycatch, the problem is that, you know, they're so large that actually for them to develop and for them to grow, it takes so long. And it's only just been looked at recently, but the egg case of a skate that was actually, it was brought on board, and it released its egg case on board. So that egg case, you might have seen some of this stuff, it was actually put in the Sam's aquarium in Oban to actually monitor, and it was a great opportunity to actually see that embryo developing. So that actual egg case took 18 months, about 18 months for that juvenile to hatch out. So if that's how long it takes for them to sort of mature within the egg case, then, you know, okay, they hatch out, they're pretty large when they hatch out, but still you've got, you know, slow growth rate, long time to reach maturity. Then they've got to find other adults to breed, you know, then they've got to get back to an egg laying site, and they've got to do all this. And actually, if you have a lot of fishing pressure in between, it can absolutely decimate a population. So it's very much about sort of management. It's about letting, if one area is really, you know, great for their egg cases, and perhaps it's, you know, just off, you're talking, Chris, about how a few juveniles are being seen potentially in not too far a distance away. We've got a perfect juvenile site, a nursery site, where, you know, they're predating and the young are starting to grow. And actually, you know, that's just as much important to protect that site. So we need to kind of identify these sites, find out as much as we can, get everybody on board to do that, and then go from there, really, and just kind of protect an area or certain areas, and then hopefully, you know, the population have got a chance to recover. They might be highly site specific. They might be hanging around these sites and, you know, living their whole lives there, or like Chris says, they could be scooting off to wherever in the meantime, perhaps a really rich feeding ground or feeding source, and then coming back to the breeding sites. Perhaps they're returning, you know, every few years to lay at that particular site. Who knows? But it's like a really exciting opportunity. It's such a, you know, a massive charismatic animal that we're talking about that's in our waters. Very few people, I'm yet to dive with an adult. I haven't seen one in the water. And yet we do know that they come into the shallower areas because they're in, you know, they're being seen in like 8 meters, 12 meters. So they are where people are potentially diving. It's just a matter of spotting them on the day, really.
They've got to be there, because there wouldn't be any egg cases, would there? If there exactly. Are none, chicken and egg. Sorry to interrupt this episode to drop another plug for my Patreon account, but I do spend several hours on each episode in the search for new guests, the recording, the post-production, the advertising, and sometimes days on my YouTube videos. So to help me keep up with its production and the frequency of releases, I'm asking for you to become a sponsor and Patreon of the Are You a Scuba Diver? Fancy a Brew podcast. When you become a supporter, not only will you have my undying appreciation for helping to support the podcast, but you'll be able to take advantage of some of the many tiered benefits that come with it, some of which includes official merchandise. If you'd like to become a patron, go to www.patreon.com/FancyABrew. There you'll see all the many levels of subscription and how to join the Fancy a Brew community. So without further ado, let's get back to this episode.
One of the next steps, I think, for me is I want to take some baited remote underwater video stations, BREWs for short.
BREWs,
right?
Yeah, I love BREWs.
You know about a BREW, right? Good. So I want to take some BREWs out to the inner sound and put them down on and around the site of the egg cases, because as you've just said, there are 100% definitely adults there at some point to lay their purses. The ones we've seen on the site are clearly of different ages. It's not just like they've all been laid in one day and that's that. There's really fresh ones. If you're very careful and lift one up, you can shine a torch through them and see the yolk. inside the egg, just like you can with other species of ray and skate as well. And you can actually see that it's just a yolk, no developing embryo yet. And other ones you can actually see, I've seen the juveniles inside wiggling around,
Awesome.
moving about inside the egg. And there's a lot of empty purses that are clearly very old. They're almost rotting away to nothing, which takes years because this stuff that the purses are made of is extremely tough. So yeah, it's really important, I think, to get back. I mean, you know, there was areas where there was almost like buckets of eggs in one little spot, which suggests, I mean, literally, there was one spot I counted 40, and I wasn't even trying to be particularly careful, but I counted 40, and it was what do you reckon, Lauren? 2 meters square? You know,
if that.
Yeah. So it was basically like someone had picked up a bucket of them and poured them in this one spot. Obviously, that hasn't happened. That's how the females want to lay them. So whether they're responding to, you know, chemical cues where they can scent there's other eggs there, it might be all the same female's eggs, and she wants to lay them in the same spot. I think possibly more likely it's lots of different females just thinking that spot is ideal. I'm going to drop my egg there. But these eggs aren't buried in any way. They're just dropped on the seabed. So they rely on the topography of the seabed to hold them in one place. So they need to have this sort of rocky ground to sort of wedge these purses in amongst the rocks and keep them safe. But the trouble is, of course, that any sort of wave action will then wash those purses out onto flatter ground. And that's, you know, that's when they're going to end up either getting washed into shore. Lauren was lucky. Well, don't know if it's lucky, Lauren, but Lauren found one on the shore that had an embryo in it, unfortunately dead. It had been a frosty night and it had frozen. But, you know, they do get washed up. But the ones that are, you know, out in the inner sound there would be safe if it wasn't for human impact. So we really need to limit that human impact as much as possible. And I think if we just, you know, but protecting one area is great. However, I think we really need to look at how fisheries policies are implemented. You know, the rules around where and what type of fishing you can do are really quite woolly, and basically are allowing the sort of slow destruction, if you like, of our inshore waters, which is where most of these nurseries are. So it's you know, it's critical. I think the government relook at some of their strategies for looking after our fish stocks.
How can people get involved to sort of lobby whoever it might need to be?
I mean, there's a few things you can do. I mean, one of the main things, which a lot of people don't generally like to do, but is write to your local MSP if you're in Scotland, MP if you're in England, and just tell them that you're concerned about this. You know, if a lot of divers are, you know, we're the eyes of the underwater world. You know, if it wasn't for diving, there'd be very little known about underwater places apart from ROV work, which most folk can't do because it's very expensive to have an ROV. Diving is not a cheap sport by any means, as you'll know, but you know, it's open to anybody, you know, within reason. So divers get to see a lot of things that science just doesn't know about, you know. So write to your MSP, tell them that you're concerned about whatever it is you're concerned about. In this case, skate juveniles in the inner sound of Skye. You know, and that's what they're there for. They're there to reply to their constituents, you know. But there's other things you can do as well. You can get involved in things like Sea Search, which you might have heard of, Andy. Sea Search are a really good organisation. If you're at a sort of, if you feel like you're at a loose end with your diving, if you're just, you know, you're a competent diver now, you've done a bit of training, you don't really fancy getting, you know, trained higher, you're looking for a new challenge, Sea Search is a really good thing to do. Basically, they train you on how to identify habitats underwater, different habitats, how to basically fill in a form that is then sent away centrally to Sea Search. And the data from that will have, you know, habitat data as well as species seen on the dive type data. And that all gets input into various databases, which is accessible to all the governments in the UK. And is Sea Search data is used by governments to inform policy. So, you know, it's a really good way you can do it as well. We've got a petition on a group called Our Seas, which is a group of, at the moment, 70, I believe, or either just over or just under 70 different Scottish organisations, businesses, environmental and non-governmental organisations, all kinds of things that are all basically coming together and saying, look, we need a change in the way policy is implemented for Scottish fisheries around Scottish shores. There will be similar things in England as well, and around Ireland too, I'm sure, but certainly in Scotland, it's the Our Seas Coalition. So if anybody's got their own business or anything like that that they want to join, have a wee look, Our Seas. But you can also sign a petition if you look for the hashtag Our Seas. I think that's right, is it, Lauren?
It's an inshore limit as well. So and also this is, I just want to make the point as well, this is kind of to answer your question, Andy, that if anyone's seeing this, perhaps they don't dive, but they can't dive, but they've just got a real keen interest in how they can make a positive contribution, then it's certainly worth looking up this petition. And it's hashtag inshore limit, or we'll send you the links after so people can have a look, to be honest with you. And
Nice.
It's about extending that limit. So instead of everyone being able to fish real on the inshore waters, originally there was a 3-mile limit, am I right in saying, Chris, where outside that, that's where your trawling and your dredging, etc., had to take place, and it was sort of pushed further afield. And and then the habitats inshore were a bit more of protected, a bit sort of more of a safe space for the animals in there, and the habitats as well. So we're trying to actually reinstate a level of inshore limit and to actually make that effective. So we need the signatures to be able to get on that petition, for then it to be something that's opened up to debate, which they have to debate. So that's where we're starting, and that's also the Our Seas website. We will give you all the links after, but that's also a good place for people to start to actually kind of learn more about these things as well, and to have a look at all the collaborative organisations, because we do have a lot of support from various commercial fishing operations. Got like the hand dive scallop divers and the creel fishers and things like that, and they want to safeguard the seas as much as anybody else. And I think there's always going to be a level of impact to any type of fishing, let's face it, but there's ways of minimizing the detrimental effects to the habitat and the species within it. And I think if we just have a level of management that is effective and can actually do this, then the species ultimately will stand a chance.
Have you had quite a positive uptake from the media? Have they embraced it and sort of passed the word on quite a lot?
Coming on your podcast here, Andy, is probably the absolute height of the media interest so far. No, we are very...
What do you mean you're joking? Get off! How'd you mute you? Mute you now.
No, we have. We've had lots of interest actually, and it's surprising because, as Lauren said, there was a short story 3 weeks I think ago now about this juvenile skate that hatched at Sam's, and it was published online. It was by the BBC. And I contacted the guy that had written that article and had broadcast that, and said to him, look, I found these purses, blah, 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 blah. I gave him the whole story. Is there any chance you'd like to follow up on that? And he said, to be honest, probably not. And the reason he gave was because the skate story was the hardest story he'd had to push this year. And it's because of coronavirus. Everything is either coronavirus or Brexit, and it's bore fest, is it not? So absolutely. I was like, yeah, but this is a good story. This is a good news story. We found one of the very, very few. I've since found that we know of 2 other sites in the world that have skate purses like this, okay? And they're both in Orkney. So the 3 sites that anybody that I've spoken to knows of that have skate purses in these kind of numbers are all in Scotland, 1 in mainland and 2 in Orkney. So, it's incredibly rare, and it's a good news story in that it's a critically endangered animal. If you think about it, and it's quite a good analogy really, but another critically endangered animal is the giant panda. Now you imagine if we found a family of giant pandas in the middle of the forest near Aberdeen. Do you think they'd go in and go, yeah, that's great, that's fantastic, but actually we're just gonna chop that forest down now? That's kind of what's happening here. And just because these animals are underwater, they shouldn't be any less protected or I think because they're underwater, nobody sees them. They're slimy, they're scaly, they're cold, they're alien to us. Whereas a cuddly, warm, cozy panda, it's easier to get behind, and that's really not the way it should be. So
imagine if you did have those pandas, the amount of the economy would drive around that so much. So these skates, if they are as big as this room that I'm in now, a couple of meters square, that's a decent dive, that, isn't it? That's worth going to see as long as we're not interrupting them. Much like the Farne Islands. Everyone goes to Farne Islands because there's something to see.
You don't need to tell me, mate. You know, we need to tell everyone else. This is the trouble.
I know.
I mean, you're absolutely right. There's no reason why these animals can't form part of some sort of tourism. I mean, the trouble is, being critically endangered, I really don't think we should try and encourage every Tom, Dick and Harry to go and try and dive with them. However, as long as you're diving sensibly, like you've just said, and you know you're not interacting with them, you're not getting in their face. You know, take a few photos, watch them swim past. That's not going to do any harm whatsoever. And to be blunt, you know, these animals are so critically endangered because of human impact. We need to do something. We can't just leave them alone. You know, we cannot just leave them alone. No. They will go extinct if we leave them alone because they will get fished to extinction. What we need to do is find them, find out as much as we can about them, their sex, their size, where they spend their time, what they eat, where they lay their eggs. Well, we found one of those patches already. I highly doubt it's the only one in mainland Scotland. So there's more out there waiting to be found. And all these things we need to find out. So yeah, get in the water. You know, it's a great, you're corona safe down there. You know, get underwater and go and look for these animals and report back to us. It's very exciting times.
Mm-hmm. And it is, I think, with the media and stuff, you know, I mean, we did have, to be fair, we had great coverage from Sky News, didn't we? And that was driven largely by Blue Marine Foundation, which were extremely helpful in helping Chris out with this and really getting it promoted and stuff. And, you know, that's brilliant. And sometimes it's just then having to keep the energy and keep the momentum driving it forward until we get, you know, some sort of level of protection, or at least which we do seem to be actually gaining some ground on as well, and we're starting to get responses and things, so hopefully this is something that we will be able to pull together ultimately. But I mean, it's an absolutely fantastic site, you know, that we found, and it's an incredible story in terms of the flapper skate and the animal and everything that's kind of associated with it. It's just really great to kind of get this out there. And I just want to say, you know, like, thanks for letting us come on basically and talk about it again, because I just urge anyone to kind of, you know, start having a look, having a Google, get on there, have a look about flapper skates, find out what you can, and always keep your eyes open if you're on a beach, particularly in around Scotland, that's for sure. And you know, any egg cases you find, we want to know about it, because it's all just going to add to the database right now.
You're very welcome for coming back on and sharing your story with me. I just kind of wish that more people I could reach out to sort of share that news, because obviously I'm not Sky News and I'm certainly not as popular as some people on Twitter and other podcasts, but I'll do my best with sharing it.
Like, I'm just a random punter. So is Lauren, basically. We're, you know, by no means experts. We don't have a huge amount of training or anything like that. We're just some random folk who decided, you know what, let's go and try and find these things, and we found them. You know, it just shows anybody can do it, and that's what citizen science is all about. It's people putting in a little bit of effort, because it's been a lot of effort, to be blunt, but putting in a little bit of effort, and you know, we are literally pushing the boundaries, you know, of what is known, literally. You know, there's so little known about these animals, and it's fantastic that we can be part of it, and I feel really chuffed. And the support, like Lauren says, the support we've had behind the scenes has been amazing because of all these other people who are in exactly the same situation as me. You know, there's some charities there, and there's just individuals, there's folks saying, look, I've got a boat, I might be able to lend you that for the day, you know, all this kind of stuff. And it's really, really encouraging. And honestly, this is why I think it's such a good news story. And I'm so surprised that Scottish Government didn't do anything about it sooner. Because let's be clear, they've known about this site for over a year now. I told them about this, yeah? So they've had a year to put some protection in place, and they haven't. And I think that says a lot. Now, because this is now out there in the media, there is more pressure on the Scottish Government to do something about it. So fingers crossed they will. But you know what? It shouldn't need that. It shouldn't need a bunch of random people like me and Lauren and all the other folk behind the scenes pushing the Scottish Government to do the right thing. You know, they're there to respond to us, the people, and to look after our wildlife and the future of the seas. You know, I want my boys to be able to go diving and see animals under there. not just see a toxic sludge from all the gunk that gets poured into the seas with no fish in it anymore. Do you know what I mean? It's just like, I get really quite annoyed, but I mean, it's been fantastic being part of it, because, you know, so many folk are so supportive and overjoyed to hear about the news and all that sort of thing. So it's been great. And, you know, the media have picked it up quite well. So I'm very pleased that they have. And I am actually very pleased to be on this podcast too, because I think it's, you know, the more people we can reach, the better. So
Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing your story with me. I appreciate that you wanted to come back and tell me about it, to be fair. So, big love. But I love Lauren's face, though, when you said, we're just a couple of random people. Lauren's like, I've got a PhD.
A random PhD.
A random one, yeah.
All right. Well, cheers, Andy, and we'll send you them pictures and whatever.
Nice one. All right. Well, thanks for coming. Have a good weekend, and I'll share the news as soon as I can. See you later.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye. Bye.
That brings us to an end of this bonus episode with my friend Dr. Lauren Smith and Chris Rickard. I'd like to reiterate just how important it is that you can get behind this petition and lobby your MP to also get behind this when it's discussed in Parliament. Links to all the things we discussed are in the podcast notes. You've been listening to Are You a Scuba Diver? Fancy a Brew podcast with me, Andy the Northern Diver. You can find more scuba related content on my YouTube channel. The link is in the podcast notes. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing and leaving us a 5-star review. And to become a patron of the podcast, visit www.patreon.com/Fancy a Brew. There you'll be able to see the different levels of subscription and how to join the Fancy a Brew community. If there's someone or something you'd like us to discuss, please let us know via our Facebook page. Thanks for listening. See you on the next one.